I wish you all a good morning as well. My name is Mike Vincent, and I'm going to give a talk today that I like to call Science is Cool. Promoting science to non-scientists. The first thing I want to talk to you about today is kind of the situation of science in the country right now. We're bombarded with science. It's in the media, it's on TV. And scientists are always being portrayed as, being baffled. Scientists are baffled at why this is happening. And, it kind of just gives this mental image of like this Mr. Magoo-like character, fumbling along. And, then you have the U-Docs, Dr. Oz and, Oprah and all these really high-profile, media personalities that just promote everything left and right. And the worst part is that Dr. Oz actually does get a few things right here and there. And because of that, it lends credibility to the crap he's peddling, depending on the day of the week. And then you've got just bad science. You've got like the CSI effect, where it's just gotten so pervasive that people think that science is just, okay, well, Grissom's going to come rushing into the courtroom with this armload of forensic evidence, and the reality is it doesn't actually work that way. The politics of science today is just crazy. It's very partisan. It seems that it's more about which party you're affiliated with than who's supporting correct science. They're funding bills, and right now with the budget the way it is, they're slashing things left and right. One of the more recent budgets that I was able to come across was slashing $1 billion from the National Institutes of Health, $750 million from the CDC. They've had massive cuts to NASA, the National Science Foundation, the EPA. I mean, just everywhere you look, it's just cut. And then on top of that, you've got these politicians that are just pushing climate change denial, global warming. Hey, it's snowing outside. Global warming isn't real. I don't buy that. And it really just throws a wrench into the works of, the hard work of real scientists. And then you have folks like Don McElroy, who was the superintendent of the Texas Board of Education, who, in one of his, getting up on the pulpit and yelling at people was actually saying someone needs to stand up to these experts. He was talking about basically academic freedom, what they call academic freedom bills, trying to promote creation science, intelligence design, whatever you want to call it, in the classrooms. And brings us to education. Again, teachers are being laid off left and right. And then on top of that, here's a statistic I came across that was published in Science. 60% of U.S. high school biology teachers, are not advocates either way of evolutionary biology or non-scientific alternatives. So basically, they're kind of like, all right, here's science, and they just try and brush over the topic completely because they're either not supportive of it in the first place, or they're terrified of, the hate mail and the phone calls and, just the headaches that it can cause them to have some kid go home, say, hey, we learned about evolution in school today. And the parents, light their torches and get their pitchforks. My solution, I like this. Slap this in every textbook. Someday someone will clone a dinosaur. It says it right there. And what's funny is, while this isn't exactly what's happening, it's pretty close. It's actually, science is really cool today. So how do we excite people about science? How do we, everyone in here probably has some area of science that they find interesting. I got my degree in zoology. I tend to be partial to the biological sciences, evolution. I've gotten interested in science education. What are you passionate about? What areas interest you? And, narrow it down. Because, if you say, I'm interested in biology, well, that's a big field. People spend entire careers, learning, let alone becoming experts in, specific, more specific areas. Research it, follow it. Wikipedia is actually a great tool. A lot of people disparage it, and the criticisms are that anyone can edit it. So there's a lot of problems with some web pages getting what they call graffiti, vandalized. But as that happens, they actually flag pages and say, okay, well, evolution, hot topic. People kind of get in there and really try and screw with things, either large things, or they'll just try and throw something subtle in. So they actually can lock the pages down so that they can't just be edited by anyone. You have to go to their discussion area if you notice something and say, oh, actually the Origin of Species was written by Charles Darwin. You've got it in there wrong. And if there's a consensus and the people in the discussion group all say, oh, how could we have missed that? Then they'll go and they'll fix it. You can also review the history of it so you can see how things have changed and if there are, problems that have been happening with that. The other really great part about Wikipedia is that they list the references, and check them. Go to your topic that you like, check them. The evolution page, you can't see how far down it goes, but we've got one here and 155 on the top of that column. There's 285 citations on this, references. You don't have to check them all, but look at them over. There's got to be a couple that could be interesting to for further research. The other thing that we have are tools. Tools. How to understand the basics of persuasion. Nobody likes the used car salesman bit. Nobody likes the professor who's standing up there droning on and on about some really in-depth topic that nobody's really interested in. They don't make it interesting. They don't make it attainable by people. And we're focusing here on people that aren't scientists to begin with, that don't have the basic understanding. So use logic. Explain the scientific method. Explain how things are. How you work through this thought. Learn how to study how to form logical arguments. Assuming this, given this, that then it follows that, this would work. Basically, think of the best salespeople you've thought of. If you've ever run into a good salesperson, they're likable. They're not trying to sell you this beater old car or whatever. You almost feel like you've made a friend. You haven't, but it's the game. And the biggest tip is just be enthusiastic. Enthusiasm is infectious. If you're not enthusiastic about the topic you want to talk about, don't. Find something else. As a biologist, I came across a few truths about, what interests people. Basically, it can be really interesting if it poops. It can be really interesting if it pukes. It can be interesting if it's poisonous. If it spits. If it has sex, or if it dies. All of these things, are inherently interesting to most people. Like, nobody wants to sit and watch hours and hours of any of those things on video, but the topics are the topics are inherently interesting to someone who's maybe unfamiliar with it. Poison arrow frogs are very cool. Watson. I don't know if any of you were following this, but just last week, IBM pitted a computer against the two winningest champions on Jeopardy, and it cleaned up. So it's actually when they first broke the news about it and stuff, we're talking about it. A lot of people were joking that it was basically the birth of Skynet. But it was built using 90 top-of-the-line servers, 15 terabytes of RAM. That's a hell of a lot of RAM. And that's more RAM than probably all of us in this room have on our computers and all of our families put together. You know, it wasn't connected to the internet, and that I find is really cool because it actually, they just downloaded a copy of, you know, Wikipedia, IMDb, and a few other sources that it would use for referencing. And it actually, you know, it used learning to calculate probabilities and figure out what the correct answer is. It used the actual language of the input question and broke it down into, you know, and figured out the answer. Most of the time it was pretty good. Even on the show, there were times when it seemed to bring answers completely out of left field that were very wrong. You know, not even close, but very wrong. And I find it really cool for future applications. You know, a lot of people are talking about, you know, potential for integrating it into, you know, the medical field, for instance. You know, it can parse thousands and thousands of research articles and see what the latest science is saying about this condition. You know, I mean, the best doctors in the world just can't keep up with the literature. You know, and it's not to say it's going to replace the doctors, and it's not to say that it's going to replace them trying their best to follow it, but, you know, working alongside them, it can make it better. You know, popularizers are a great way of looking, you know, there's lots of people out there that have kind of made science attainable at different levels to the population at large. You know, here's just a short kind of compendium I have of, you know, of people. You know, you got some of the ones that everyone recognizes. You've got, you know, Dawkins, Sagan, Asimov. You've even got, you know, musicians. You've got Tim Minchin on the far right there. You've got They Might Be Giants. And I actually recommend that album. If any of you haven't heard it, it's actually really cool. It was kind of geared towards kids, but it's really attainable and has some great songs. One's called My Brother the Ape. There's another one called just Science is Real. Another one called Put It to the Test, just talking about the scientific method and just how to think like a scientist. David Attenborough, the Mythbusters. Mr. Wizard up in the far right. Another really good quote, you know, by Anatole France. You know, do not try to satisfy your vanity by teaching a great many things. Awaken people's curiosity. It's enough to open minds. Do not overload them. Put there just a spark. If there's some good flammable stuff, it will catch fire. Now, that is the goal. You know, if someone doesn't know anything about physics, going on and on and on about the intricacies of, you know, cosmology and, you know, quantum mechanics, you're just going to fly over their heads and they're going to think that you're a pedantic twit. You know, show them why it's cool. Put a few facts in there that are attainable, and they'll come by and they'll actually be, you know, interested next time and ask you a few more questions. You know, science is badass. You know, here's a honey badger. These things eat cobras. You know, they'll battle leopards. You know, they're badass. You know, science is beautiful. You've got the giant blue earthworm. These things can grow 13 feet long. And they're blue. You know, they're amazing. You know, glow-in-the-dark mushrooms. They're kind of spread across the entire southern hemisphere. Not a lot of people know about them. And in the middle here, we've got a mineral called moldavite, which is a naturally occurring glass that really only happens in one part of the world. You know, interestingly enough, in Moldova, because a meteor happened to hit the right type of a mineral deposit and create it. You know, science is beyond words. This is a pig butt worm.
What?
Yeah. It's found in the deep, deep, deep ocean, basically at about the depth where oxygen starts being really depleted. And it's an annelid worm, so like the segmented worms like you see in the garden, and that's why it has these kind of the ring shapes. They just kind of compressed. You know, a barrel-eye fish. These are actually the eyes up here, not those. Those are nostrils. The eyes are pointing up through the clear head. And the water bears. Water bears are totally badass. They're borderline indestructible. They exist from the deepest parts of the ocean to the top of the Himalayas. They mostly eat algae, depending on where they live. They've been taken out into space and exposed to space, brought back to Earth, given a little bit of water, and gone on to lead happy lives, reproducing and everything. You know, that's, you know, better than we could say. So I want to talk about this story of Nicholas Volker. This, I totally geek out about this. This is what the T-Rex story I was talking about. This kid, when he was 18 months old, they first noticed that he had a cut that wouldn't heal. So they took him into the doctor. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. Shortly thereafter, he started developing these little pinpricks all over his skin of bleeding. And he just started bleeding. And they wouldn't heal. And the problem is that those were also up through his intestinal tract. So he ended up getting all sorts of infections. Doctors were just, much as I hate to say it, baffled. But what they did was, they went through, he'd been through 100 surgeries by the time he was 3 years old. He actually had to have his colon removed because it became so infected. But, so what they did is they said, okay, well, we don't know what else is left. Let's sequence his genes. Maybe there is a new mutation that we've never seen before. Well, they sequenced all 20,000 of his genes and found 2 mutations. So they then found a genetic donor and gave him a cord blood transplant, which contains stem cells from just a matched donor. And for those 2 genes, his gene therapy, it's genetically based medicine. Now he's living the life of a transplant recipient. He's perfectly healthy. He can have steak. He loves steak. He's 4 years old. He loves steak. And I say more power to him. If you happen to be interested, here's a couple of books that I was able to track down. Unscientific America, just talking about the situation. And a couple of books that specifically are geared along the lines of this topic, just communicating with the public, trying to make people understand what you're doing, what you're interested in.